Hello, it's Marcus Washington from MTC Media here at Smith Center as George Washington defeats George Mason 75 to 62. Uh, the Revolutionaries were led by Darren Buchanan's 21 points, 9 rebounds. James Bishop had 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists, and then Stretch had 11 rebounds in the game. For George Mason, they were led by Keyshawn Hall's 19. Maury Kelly had 17. So this was a game where you just never felt like George Mason got their footing. GW came out early and punched them in the face pretty immediately, jumping out to a 5-0 lead, and then that grew to 10-2 before it looked like George Mason was getting engaged in this game. And a lot of it was just George Mason just seemed a step slow on everything. It seemed a step slow on offense. It seemed a step slow on defense. They're almost like surprised that GW was attempting to play defense at the beginning of their game. GW's on-ball pressure was probably a little bit more than what it usually is, but it also looked like George Mason was sluggish with the ball. Like I said, almost like it had caught them off guard there in the first half. So GW would go up by as much as 18 points in that first half. At one time being up 37-19 with 50 seconds left in the half. George Mason had a little bit of a run, cut it to 37-24 before the end of the half. But a lot of it is that GW had that pace, and you know what it's like to play against this team. They're going to give you chances to get back in, just simply because of the number of possessions that are being played. The problem with George Mason was in that first half was they didn't take advantage of it. There were times where George Mason had opportunities in secondary transition to get an early basket, to get an early one that was close, all those type of things. They just didn't finish. You know, a lot of it was not finished. Now, I will say that George Washington's contest in the lane in the first half was really, really good. You were always going through arms. You were always going through bodies. They were willing to cede the jumpers there in the first half, or so it seemed. I asked Caputo about that. He kind of sort of acknowledged it, as long as it wasn't Darius Maddox taking the shot. But yeah, he acknowledged there was a couple of guys in that on George Mason that they were willing to allow to have jump shots, which I understand. If you look at George Mason, where they've struggled and how they've struggled, I would do the same thing. I wouldn't want Amari Kelly and Keyshawn Hall getting started early, because then that snowballs into other guys getting confidence, playing off of them. So it made sense. So Mason was down, like I said, by I believe it was 12 at halftime, 13 at halftime, 37-24, and then they came out in the second half, and really they threw the first punch of the second half, getting it down to 42-37. The offense came alive. Kelly was going inside and out, and I felt like on defense, anytime George Washington got the ball almost by the dunker spot, it wasn't necessarily dunker spot, but almost by the dunker spot, there was a double that came, and it was pretty good rotation on those doubles. And then what ended up happening was GW just got out of their offense. And it's so funny because after that run, I never saw George Mason do that again. That sort of forced the ball to get there. Now maybe Caputo called some different things where that wasn't the natural next pass, or whatever the case may be. But you just didn't see that. And then probably where the game was, I thought this was the first big kind of the first big stretch in the second half. Was Mason gets it to 5, GW comes out of the timeout, and they get an and one from Ja'Cory Hutchinson. They get a big drive in the basket where Buchanan gets fouled and he finishes it. And it's like that was the first pushback that George Washington had. It was the first really, really pushback that they had. And then the second pushback was, you figure it's a 7-point game, right? And we're getting around that 5-something mark. And George Mason gets 3 straight stops. And this is how those possessions end. Kelly gets the rebound. Billups runs into him. Kelly falls. They call traveling on George Mason. So after the first stop, there's a turnover. George Mason gets another stop and then gets a beautiful baseline drive. Kelly does what he's supposed to. He shows big in the lane. The pass gets to him, and it's like this little half-second of indecision. And then when he decides he wants to attack stretch, he travels. So now you're 2 for 2 in chances to cut it to 5, going into, money time, and you have 2 turnovers. Then George Mason gets another stop. They're in transition. They get Maddox. GW comes on a closeout. Maddox pump fakes, and when he pump fakes, he steps on the sideline. So there's another turnover, and then next thing you know, the momentum goes away, and with that missed opportunities that George Mason ends up not being able to come back in, and GW gets a very important home win in the conference, which ends up being their 3rd in a row. You think about it, George Washington's only conference loss was the home triple overtime loss to Fordham. That's the only loss, and now Mason has lost 3 in a row in the conference. A tough home loss down at the end to VCU, and then they went to Richmond on Saturday, and that was another loss when Jordan King had this hot shooting start in the first half, and then a quick turnaround. And this was brought up in the post game by both coaches in different ways, but it was brought up. George Mason played at Richmond at 6 p.m. on a Saturday. GW played early on Saturday. I was here, I covered it. And then you have a quick Monday game. So George Mason travels, now albeit it's a bus ride, but you play at 6 o'clock. You have to travel by bus. You get home late. Then you can't take away their legs. So then Sunday becomes a prep day that you can only do so much with the prep day, because then you're turning around, whereas GW had an early game on Saturday, did not have to travel, and then you can put your scout in, put your prep in with your players, so on and so forth. So it was a tough turnaround, but that's 3 losses in a row for George Mason, and they will need to get back on the winning trail on Saturday. They'll get a few days off. They don't play again until the 20th, when St. Bonaventure comes to Eagle Bank. And for GW, the next game, 2 games on the road as they travel to UMass and they travel to Richmond. Again, this is Mark Schwartzman, MTC Media. Final score here at Smith Center: GW 75, George Mason 62.